Hi there. So we're reaching a pivotal point in the book in the second half of chapter 7 of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. So the topics in the second half are, of course, the ongoing oppressive heat, temperament between classic and romantic, and also between city and country folk. What was Phaedrus like? Mystery solved, and blessed relief. So I'm going to be doing quite a bit of reading from the book in this YouTube, as there's a lot that's germane to the understanding of what's going on. And they are in Baker. At Baker, where we stopped, the thermometer is reading 108 degrees in the shade. When I take my gloves off, the metal of the gas tank is so hot I can't touch it. The engine is making ominous knick-knacking sounds from overheating. Very bad. The rear tire has worn badly too, and I feel with my hand that it's almost as hot as the gas tank. We're going to have to slow down, I say. What? I don't think we should go over 50, I say. John looks at Sylvie and she looks at him. Something has already been said between them about my slowness, and they both look like they've about had it. We just want to get there fast, John says, and they both walk toward a restaurant. So here we are getting a sense of how uncomfortable it is in the heat and how John and Sylvia react very differently to the discomfort, than how the narrator reacts. They just want to speed up and get the hell out of this heat and to a cooler part of the trip. And the heat is really, really described with oppressive accuracy. She and John look at each other again with the same expression they showed before. It seems to say, "Three's a crowd." They may want to go ahead fast and wait for me in some town up ahead. I'd suggest it myself, except that if they go much faster, they won't be waiting for me in some town. It'll be by the side of the road. So this is kind of like the fable of the tortoise and the hare. And when you think about it, the moral of the fable is just this. You rush through something and something bad might happen in certain cases. You could say, in the worst sense of the dichotomy of classic and romantic types, that the romantic types are so concerned with aesthetics and feelings and the way things are in the moment, that they like discomfort. They can tolerate discomfort a lot less than the classic types. And this is like, of course, the romantic is like the hare who wants to, or the grasshopper and the ant, I think, and the tortoise and the hare. All those fables kind of play into that archetype of classic and romantic. I don't know how the people here stand this, Sylvia says. Well, it's hard country, I say with a little irritation. They know it's hard before they come here, and they're ready for it. I add, if one person complains, he just makes it that much harder for the others. They've got stamina. They know how to keep on going. John and Sylvia don't say much, and John finishes his Coke early and is off to the bar for a snort. Again, instant gratification. It's interesting because I know I've talked about a lot of different points of view and temperament in this, in a lot of my videos, and I bring it up in these reading videos as well. And I think it's important to note here that country folk typically are more resilient to the adversity of nature. Another dichotomy. Neither the city folk nor the country folk are better or worse than each other, obviously, but each have their strengths, and right now is not a good circumstance for the city folk, or the romantic types, you could say. And a lot of romantic city, politically liberal kind of consolidate together, as do classic conservative country folk. You could also see the dichotomy in trait openness versus trait conscientiousness, and people tend towards one or the other. Spiritual practices really attempt to cultivate a dynamic flexibility of temperament, a balance, let's just say also harmony. I suppose they took what I said as a kind of rebuke, but I didn't have that in mind. I'm no more comfortable than they are in this heat, but there's no point in dwelling on it. All day while I've been thinking and talking about Phaedrus, they must have been thinking about how bad all this is. That's what's really wearing them down, the thought. So, if you're looking at spiritual practices, this philosophy, this kind of philosophical statement he just made, is also the point of spiritual practices, is to be able to tolerate negativity with much more flexibility. Some things can be said about Phaedrus as an individual. He was a knower of logic, the classical system of the system, which describes the rules and procedures of systematic thought by which analytic knowledge may be structured and interrelated. He was so swift at this, his Stanford Binet IQ, which is essentially a record of skill at analytic manipulation, was recorded at 170, a figure that occurs in only one person in 50,000. Phaedrus did not try to use his brilliance for general illumination. He sought one specific distant target and aimed for it and hit it. And that was all. General illumination of that target he hit now seems to be left for me. So Phaedrus, like a lot of people who are super smart, is an isolated guy and basically has no friends. This is not uncommon for people with stratospheric IQs. They often have a hard time relating to people, not only because they see the world through a different lens, but because they get bored. This can cause a sort of low social intelligence, a low social IQ, because they don't see the value of relationships, and some don't care, as Phaedrus didn't. But others are socially awkward and are lonely too, and a lot of people who are ridiculed, let's just say the incels or the gamers, they're kind of made fun of as these kind of socially awkward, isolated folks. These kids often suffer from the side effects of high intelligence. You could also say high IQ affects temperament as well, which leads me to the reason I go on and on about temperament is I think it tends to be innate, and I think that there's plenty of scientific evidence for this. However, you can tweak and adjust your temperament with therapy and again with spiritual practice. Meditation, for example, increases the matter in the area of the prefrontal cortex that contributes to a number of what we see as positive traits, such as peace of mind and the ability to concentrate. His wife and family seem to have suffered the most. His wife says that those who tried to go beyond the barriers of his reserve found themselves facing a blank. My impression is they were starved for some kind of affection, which he never gave. No one really knew him. That is evidently the way he wanted it, and that's the way it was. Perhaps his aloneness was the result of his intelligence. Perhaps it was the cause. But the two were always together, an uncanny, solitary intelligence. So Phaedrus has visited the area that the cycle crew comes across as he was doing some of that work that he did with this laser-focused intelligence. He was in this area to hunt the ghost of rationality. Phaedrus had been there 3 days without food. His food has run out, but he was thinking deeply and seeing things and was reluctant to leave. He was not far away from where he knew there was a road, and there was no hurry. In the dusk coming down the trail, he saw a movement, and then what seemed to be a dog approaching the trail. Phaedrus stared into the animal's eyes for a long time, and for a moment felt some kind of recognition. Then the dog disappeared. He realized much later it was a timber wolf, and the memory of this incident stayed with him for a long time. I think it stayed with him because he had seen a kind of image of himself. Interestingly, Pirsig operated in the book under the presumption that the name Phaedrus means wolf, but it doesn't. It means brilliant or radiant, and Pirsig cleared this up in the introduction to later editions of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Like that timber wolf on the mountain, he had a kind of animal courage. He went his own way with unconcern for consequences that sometimes stunned people, and stuns me now to hear about it. He did not often swerve to the right or to the left. I've discovered that, but this courage didn't arise from any idealistic idea of self-sacrifice, only from the intensity of his pursuit, and there was nothing noble about it. I think his pursuit of the ghost of rationality occurred because he wanted to wreak revenge on it, because he felt he himself was so shaped by it. He wanted to free himself from his own image. He wanted to destroy it because the ghost was what he was, and he wanted to be free from the bondages of his own identity. In a strange way, this freedom was achieved. This account of him must sound unworldly, but the most unworldly part of it is yet to come. This is my own relationship to him. This has been forestalled and obscured until now, but nevertheless it must be known. So, the secret. I first discovered him by inference from a strange series of events many years ago. One Friday I had gone to work and gotten quite a lot done before the weekend and was happy about that, and later that day drove to a party where, after talking to everybody too long and too loudly and drinking way too much, went into a back room to lie down for a while. When I awoke, I saw that I'd slept through the whole night because now it was daylight, and I thought, my God, I didn't even know the name of the hosts. So I hope you read this chapter, because this is going to be a major spoiler if you haven't. The narrator recalls waking up, and it turns out he wakes up in the hospital, where he has been for several weeks. Apparently, he had a major breakdown. But his memory is completely erased. He jokes with the staff that he doesn't even have a hangover. He's really thinking that it's still the morning after the party. But now he's waking up to who he is now, the narrator, and the doctor makes a note of this. It's very early for this to be happening, he said. This looks like a hospital, I said. They agreed. How did I get here? I asked, thinking about the drunken party. The man said nothing, and the woman looked down. Very little was explained. It was explained to me finally that you have a new personality now. But this statement was no explanation at all. It puzzled me more than ever, since I had no awareness at all of any old personality. If they had said, you are a new personality, it would have been much clearer. That would have fitted. But who was the old personality whom they had known and presumed I was continuation of? This was my first inkling of the existence of Phaedrus many years ago. In the days and weeks and years that have followed, I've learned much more. He was dead, destroyed by order of the court, enforced by the transmission of high-voltage alternating current through the lobes of his brain. Approximately 800 mils of amperage at durations of 0.5 to 1.5 seconds had been applied on 28 consecutive occasions in a process known technologically as annihilation ECS. A whole personality had been liquidated without a trace in a technologically faultless act that has defined our relationship ever since. I've never met him, never will. And yet strange wisps of his memory suddenly match and fit this road and desert bluffs, and white-hot sand all around us, and there is a bizarre concurrence. And then I know he has seen all of this. I see things with my own eyes, and I see things with his eyes too. He once owned them. Those eyes, that is the terror of it. These gloved hands I now look at, steering the motorcycle down the road, were once his. And if you can understand the feeling that comes from that, then you can understand real fear. The fear that comes from knowing there is nowhere you can possibly run. So what's happening is that Phaedrus is slowly emerging now, and we now understand who Phaedrus is, a very troubled genius whose intellectual pursuits have led to a psychotic break. And that psychosis was handled exactly the way it typically was in the late 50s, through electroshock, a lot of it, and very intense. As we now see, the narrative switches back and forth between Phaedrus's intellectual and philosophical quest and the present time, the narrator on the motorcycle trip with his friends. So what about that heat? Sweet relief, finally. The sun angles toward the cloud, which now has grown downward to touch the horizon above us, in which there are trees, pines, and a cold wind comes down with pine smells from the trees. The flowers in the meadow blow in the wind, and the cycle leans a little, and we are suddenly cool. I look at Chris, and he is smiling. I am smiling too. Then the rain comes hard on the road with a gust of earth smell from the dust that has waited far too long, and the dust beside the road is packed with the first raindrops. I think we have arrived, John says. Sylvie and Chris have walked into the meadow among the flowers under the pines, through which I can see the far side of the valley, away and below. I am a pioneer now, looking onto the promised land. So I want to mention one line in this chapter that is a harbinger of things to come in Lila. A photograph can show a physical image in which time is static, and a mirror can show a physical image in which time is dynamic. So I hope that made sense, and I will see you next Sunday for Chapter 8.